Hello, Mark.
Hi, Gabby. How are you?
Very well indeed. I've got a few any other businesses to bring to the table, if it's all right this morning.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, of
I mean,
course.
absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, are they
No,
sporting?
not at all.
Relevant?
No,
Oh, right.
not at all. I thought about this morning. Will he care? Probably not, but I'm going to tell him anyway. I come in on the train and the tube quite often to do the sports agents, and at this time of year, it's just a pain in the backside, isn't it? Because 1 minute it's raining, the next minute it's 22 degrees. And so I arrive here dishevelled, hot, a bit sweaty, feeling kind of flustered. And it's only like 9:30 a.m. when all these emotions are overtaking me before I come in. And so I just want to get that off my chest, because I sit here before you, having left my house feeling quite groomed and coiffed and ready to sit in front of a camera. And now I just feel like a bag lady. So,
Well, there are two things there. You see, there's a benefit in taking my approach of never
Worrying.
looking groomed for anything. Therefore, if you always look dishevelled, people never question it when if you're always trying to look your best, Gabby, that's the problem.
Listen,
when you look dishevelled.
This is obviously totally irrelevant if you only ever listen to us and you don't go to YouTube, where all episodes are now available. But maybe this will prompt you to go there, because all episodes are now available on YouTube, and then you might just stay away from that platform once you've seen us.
When we first started, I actually did pay, because you do set a high bar, right? You always do look very well, as you say. I don't want to make you sound like a dog, but well groomed, and you are always. My God, I'm going to get myself in a hole I can't get out of it. And at the start, I thought, I'm going to try and match that. And then after a while, I just thought it's absolutely pointless. And bizarrely, since we went on YouTube, I think I've become more dishevelled.
You've become.
I'm trying to make an effort a bit more with Match of the Day. Nobody noticed this. I've told you. But last year I wore the same black jumper for every single Match of the Day.
I noticed that, because yes,
you?
I did, and I noticed a lot about what men wear on sports presentation and sports punditry, because quite often through my career, not now, clearly the landscape's changed, but I was often the only girl and woman in those environments, and I always felt I had to wear the colour, because men are so greige, all the shirts were the same colours. They were either blue or grey, and I always felt like I should wear colour and then I started working with Robbie Savage sometime in the mid-2000s, and he brought pink to the table, and lilac polar necks and things like that. But yeah, I did notice the black jumper, and I was going to intervene.
I wonder if I can. I'm starting to think, I wonder if I can get away with it, of just doing it. And it turns out you noticed, but I don't think anybody else would have.
There's a whole website set up about it, actually. There's an account.
I've tried to make more of an effort this season, but you are right. It's either black, grey, beige, blue, and that's about it.
On serious matters, this
sport.
Yes, this episode will dominate. This episode will be dominated thanks to an idea put forward by a listener, Stephen, in Belfast. He sent us an email suggesting this episode should be about athletes who are still owed millions from Grand Slam track, as we said in the introduction. And with the World Championships just about to start, we're going to be joined by an agent to many of the stars who are still owed money, the brilliant Adam Crafton, who did a fantastic story on this in the New York Times. So we've got that still to come, which is fantastic. We've got that still to come. But if you've got a story for us, we'd like you to get in touch, whether it's about Mark's clothes or not.
They're all right now. I mean,
you look good today.
I look like I've got a gardening jumper on today, but it's just comfy. The sports agents at global.com, if you want to get in touch with us, or on our socials, or via the link in the episode description. And the main body, as Gabby says, is going to be athletics. But I wonder whether we just touch on summer sports as well in general, which is at the moment tennis and cricket, because the US Open saw a fantastic story on the women's side of things, with Amanda Anisimova, who was walloped in the Wimbledon final, 6-love to Iga Swiatek. Just came back and beat her to reach the US Open semi-final. It's such a great story. It's a
brilliant story. And it shows you, I was at that final watching that match, and it just shows you the power of the mind, doesn't it? Because you could see her collapsing at Wimbledon, her confidence capitulating, and clearly the talent's there, and how the mind in a sport like tennis and golf actually, can really creep in and cripple the performance. So it was a brilliant kind of revenge, wasn't it?
And in straight set, 6-4, 6-3, and the quote is really nice from her. I told myself, you can't go into the match with any fear. Today I really came out there with not an ounce of fear. And that was on, I was doing the radio last night, I had that was on one monitor. And then on another monitor, I had Surrey against Northants in the T20 Blast quarter-final. So if people aren't up on all their cricket, the counties always play T20, and then the ECB brought in the 100 as a kind of big franchise thing because the counties weren't earning enough money. They thought that product, the Blast, wasn't bringing in enough money, and the 100 will. But it means within the space of about 5 days, we've had the finals of the 100, then England's men playing a one-dayer, so that's 50 overs, and getting thrashed by South Africa in one of the most depressing one-day internationals I think I can ever remember. And then the counties now playing a Blast quarter-final, and there are others this week. It is an impossible sport to navigate at the moment, schedule-wise, and I think a little bit as a casual fan. It's like,
what's on,
hang on,
and what matters?
Why they play? What matters? Why are they playing that? What's that got to do with
And we've
anything?
had this conversation more than once on the Sports Agents, haven't we, about how cricket has got itself into such a mess in terms of its scheduling and telling the casual sports fan what actually counts. Why should I be invested in this?
And that comes off the back of an amazing summer for the men on the Test cricket side of things, with the best Test series for the men that we've seen in 20 years, with them playing India, going back all the way to the Ashes of 2005. People have put it up with there. So some of the product is, as we've talked about before, is so good, and yet to try and work out what is going on and why is really difficult. And the counties. There's another backdrop to this, just quickly, is that they've now voted for next season to change the format of the Blast. There are discussions about changing the format of the county championship, but that might be delayed for a year. And as I said whilst you were on holiday, when we did a pod with Bumble and Barney Ronay, I don't think cricket has had a domestic season where the structure has been the same in the last decade, 15 years. Something's always tweaked or changed. It's a mess. Really is.
And interestingly, I think there's a theme there which will kind of filter its way through to our bigger chat today about athletics, actually, because there's just such a crowded landscape in sport, and every sport wants a bigger piece of the pie and wants to find a way to become football, effectively. That's what they're all looking for, this holy grail of kind of ubiquity and being, on every front page and back page. And I just wonder if that's possible.
Yeah, and also it's not football, is it, Gabby? Actually, it's Premier League. That's what they're
right.
all obsessed with, and nobody bar the NFL and the NBA can compete with the nobody, not even the rest of football, can compete with the Premier League.
Just one more thing, and I think we've said that 6 times before we leave this little chat here. I was doing a Q&A for the My Name's Doddy Foundation for a charity thing last night with Henry Pollock and Catherine Granger. Interesting, kind of, as I sat down to write the interview, kind of, and do a little bit of research. It's such opposite kind of careers. Henry, as I'd introduced him, practically an amoeba. Has achieved everything in terms of playing for England, going on a Lions tour at the age of 20. Catherine, 3 Olympic cycles, 3 silvers before she finally gets her gold at London, and that perseverance. Not that there's anything wrong with getting Olympic silver. God, I would have loved one. But she, but very kind of that resilience that she needed to have. Some lovely stories kind of came out along the way. But one of the things she said at the very end, I asked her about the challenge for Olympic sport, and she mentioned that there'd been a recce recently in LA ahead of the Olympics, obviously there. And I said, and she said, it is going to be the glitziest, biggiest, TikTokiest influencer celebrity-led Olympic Games you've ever seen. In some of the stadiums, and the swimming stadium could have 60,000 capacity alone, almost a quarter of the seats are already allocated to influencers, celebrities and social media kind of stars. Yeah. So I think we kind of know we're not going to miss it, that's for sure, but I think we know the way it's heading. Interesting.
Well, there are 2 things with that. The swimming is at SoFi, I think.
Yes, it is,
isn't
yeah.
it? Which is the massive complex in LA where the Rams and the Chargers play their home games. So that is going to be a serious spectacle. And I am surprised, given my love of TikTok, that I haven't received my ticket.
Well, she did say to me, "Well, you'll be there," and I said, "No, I'll be on a green screen in Salford." But anyway, and go on. I'll give you one of Henry's great little vignettes. Was he was brilliant at talking about what it is like to go on a Lions tour, especially as a kid, as a 20-year-old.
Yeah.
And he roomed first of all with Duan van der Merwe, and but then every few days they're supposed to change, and every time he kept getting Duan van der Merwe, and I don't know whether it was an administrative cock up. He's supposed to get a new partner. Eventually, after 3 weeks, they give him somebody else, and Duan's got a different room, and they're both like, oh, we've actually become kind of, best mates now. So that he goes off, not, who's in the room, opens the door, and Owen Farrell's lying on the other bed in the room. And he just thinks, oh my God, like, it's Owen Farrell. I'm such a rookie in this relationship. So he said, oh, hi. And Owen went, hi. And then he went to the toilet for 20 minutes and sat on the loo. I said, meanwhile, Owen's texting his dad going, you know that Henry Pollock, I think he's got a bad tummy or something. But I love the fact that Henry's perceived to be one of the most confident young sports people probably in the whole nation, and even he had a kind of slight crisis of confidence in that moment about how to behave in front of Owen.
Brilliant. Our main story is next then. A report into the Grand Slam track Michael Johnson built and how it barely made it past the starting line. So on to our main story then, and this is kind of your area of expertise a bit more. This is a sport that you cover for the BBC, Gabby. So just before we bring our guests in, take us back through a little bit of the history and the background, because Michael Johnson's been on this pod to talk about it.
Not so long ago. In fact, just before the final of the Grand Slam track events was cancelled, and that's when we knew that it was in serious trouble. I think we could probably trace it back to being in trouble when we saw that nobody attended the first one in Jamaica, in Kingston, Jamaica. But let's remind you that Michael Johnson, the multi-gold medal winning athlete who has been a brilliant kind of spokesperson for the sport as well as commentator on the sport over the last few decades, came up with this idea, and there have been many ideas in athletics about how you harness that passion and kind of support for athletics during an Olympic Games cycle, when the Olympic Games is on. How do you take it forwards every year and make sure those athletes actually earn a living away from those big games? So he set up Grand Slam track. It was purported to have had $30 million investment. It's transpired now that it didn't have all that money on the table. And I think before we get into our guest today, and Adam Crafton has done a brilliant piece on this in the New York Times and has done lots of investigation, we should probably just remind you of a few of the names that he's going to mention. So Grand Slam track obviously is referred to as GST quite often. The Winners Alliance is the lead investor into the whole thing. And obviously Michael was responsible for bringing these investors in. Eldridge was another fund which was potentially going to salvage and save the whole thing by becoming another investor. And Eldridge is linked to Todd Boehly, who of course is the owner of Chelsea, and they were very close to investing a lot of money in this. So those are the kind of main parts of this that when it comes to and we made the analogy with the Fire Festival in terms of something that appeared to be real and actually it hasn't come off, and I think things were being said that perhaps weren't entirely factual. There was a lot of hope going on, but the reality was the money wasn't in the bank, and that's what we're going to talk about.
So let's bring into the discussion then Paul Doyle, who represents more than a dozen athletes who competed in Grand Slam track, and Adam Crafton from The Athletic, who's been investigating this and has written a very long piece on it in the New York Times as well. It is, isn't it, Paul? I mean, it's an obvious thing to say right out at the start, but this is a mess.
Yeah, we're in a tough spot for sure. And, I always feel that in hindsight, things would be different. And I'm sure Michael Johnson would do things a lot different in hindsight, knowing what he knows now and knowing where he's ended up. But yeah, it's a tough spot for sure.
And then generally, again, before we then come on to sort of specifics, I suppose, how would you describe the mood of athletes who are affected by all of this? Is it anger? Is it disappointment? Is there any sympathy for trying something that hasn't quite worked yet? Where are they at?
I mean, I would say in general, it's concern, right? They're conflicted a little bit because when they were at the events and the experiences they went through at the events, they felt treated really well. You know, they were really excited and happy with how things were going. Of course, at that time, had they known they weren't going to be paid, their feelings would probably be a lot different. But in general, they were happy with how things had gone and what Grand Slam track was trying to do. Of course, they want to be paid. They're owed a lot of money, and so it's conflicting for them. The majority of the athletes, I don't think, are overly angry, but more disappointed is the word I would use.
Yeah, because, Adam, there was a lot of hope that this could be the thing, because athletics has been searching for that for quite a while, that would elevate athletes, give them recognition and give them a decent income as well. But let's go back to kind of maybe pre-Kingston, actually, because, you know, there's hope pre-Kingston. None of us knew what was going on financially at this point, because all we've got is kind of Michael Johnson, you know, really as the credible public face of this whole thing. But when we saw the scenes from Kingston, I think that was slightly worrying to a lot of us who love the sport, because the crowds just didn't come out. At that point, was that when you started to kind of feel that this might not be all that it seems?
Yeah, but I guess so to a certain extent, but really it just felt like a bit of a false start more than this could be a situation where athletes end up not being paid. You know, at that point, there was nothing at all really made public to express any concern whatsoever about the financial side of it. And Paul's probably better placed than me to explain how it works with athlete payments. But I think there's a 21-day period where athletes go through drug testing protocols, and then there was an additional 10 days on top of that. So even going into Miami, no one would really realize that payments aren't being made by that point. So they kind of had this window where they could continue, at least publicly.
So publicly, there's an explanation why you're not getting paid. Behind the scenes, Adam, at this point, they knew that they didn't have enough money, and the money that they had publicly said that they were getting, 30 million, was not in the bank. They didn't have the assurance it was coming.
Yeah, I suppose this goes back actually all the way to kind of the middle of 2024, where the announcement is made by Grand Slam Track. They say that they have $30 million, over $30 million in financial commitments. That's the term they use. They don't say in cash, but I think, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels to me like I understood that to mean we've got 30 million. Now, I imagine athletes, agents going into it probably thought, you know, a lot of what's on offer here seems very out of place and out of keeping with what is usually available as kind of prize money in athletics. So I think that, you know, combined with, you know, Michael being the face of it, and some of the facilities and stadia that were being secured, you know, there was big. This was very, very unusual for athletics at that time. So I think that pledge of having 30 million financial commitments gave everyone the impression, at least, that money was in place. The reality. That Grand Slam Track and Winners Alliance, which is this fund that is the chair of the board is Bill Ackman, this US billionaire. The sources close to both of those camps have now confirmed to me that it was in fact 13 million rather than 30 million in terms of upfront cash, and that Winners Alliance had the option of an additional 19 odd million, depending on, they say, how things progressed in terms of, you know, the operational progress and how it all went. So that's very, very different, I think, to what perhaps was first expressed in their statement.
We'll bring Paul back in a moment, but on the funding and the finances, and Gabby said right at the start, Gabby said right at the start when she was explaining all this, that sometimes we might get a bit confused with this group or that group or whatever. How much, from your investigations, how much funding did they have in place, and from whom, before this actually started? And how much were they hoping that the money was going to come in from spectators actually there and broadcast deals?
Yeah, so if we break it down, so the lead investor that it was always said was this fund, Winners Alliance, which actually is kind of a spin-off of the Professional Tennis Players Association that Novak Djokovic has been involved with. So they put in 13 million. That was wired. Then they essentially make clear, I think it was around the autumn time, hopefully I've got the timeline right, that they aren't going to take up this option. And as a result of that, Grand Slam Track bring in investment bankers to help raise money. And where they end up in March, and by the way, they're chasing this money in terms of trying to raise this money in January, February. The 4 events are going to be, when were they? April till June.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's very, very tight. Athletes were contracted already.
And presumably they had to put deposits down on stadiums. If you're going to host a big event, you've got to book it. So money's going out at this point to both athletes and venues.
They are burning through the money in lots and lots of different ways, whether it's staffing costs or hotel costs. Of course, they promised athletes and delivered on this. They gave athletes business class travel. The hotels were probably better than normal. They gave athletes individual rooms. I mean, I didn't know until this that athletes usually kind of are sharing rooms unless you're in the top maybe 5-10% of athletes. So they've gone through a lot of money in that time. And due to the shortfall that they still have, I think by March, Winners Alliance then loan an additional 4 to 5 million. So even by March, April, they've got 18 million, but 4 to 5 is a loan rather than investment. And then in March, they sign a term sheet with Eldridge, which is, everything always comes back to the Premier League, is a fund which is chaired by Todd Boehly, who's obviously best known from Chelsea. And that was for an additional $30 to $40 million. However, that was a preliminary non-binding term sheet. So it wasn't legal. There was no real commitment. It was, if you speak to investors, term sheets are an indication of where something might get to. It isn't. This is definitely going to happen.
From your understanding, then, why did Eldridge decide it wasn't for them?
This is slightly contested, but certainly Eldridge's position is that they had concerns about the Grand Slam Track business model. I have seen evidence that they expressed those concerns before Jamaica, basically saying, that their concerns around it were, I think, until the end of 2026, the projections that GST had was that I think over 70% of the revenue was going to be event day based. And I think for a sports product in 2025, when you think of all the different forms of revenue you can have, when you think sponsorship, of broadcast, that means the event day has to be completely spectacular, really. And then Jamaica comes, they wanted to see Jamaica to see how that went. Jamaica was obviously really underwhelming, not enough fans in the stands, quite a lot of no-shows. However, there has also been claims at times from both Michael Johnson, GST sources saying that the impact of Donald Trump's tariffs announcements also had a part in lots of people reflecting on investments at that time. Eldridge insists it was about the business model.
Paul, back to from the athlete's point of view. So some of the figures we've seen and have been quoted. Gabby Thomas owed $180,000. Melissa Jefferson Wooden owed $300,000. Josh Kerr $160,000. I don't know how relevant this point is or isn't, but is that all prize money that they're owed? Is it appearance fees? Is it promotional? Have athletes got some but not others, or is it everything?
Yeah, so those numbers you mentioned are specifically the prize money amounts that are still due, because that's what's public. What isn't public is the promotional fees. So there's quite a bit more than that. I think you can look at the prize money and say, okay, there's a minimum of 9.6 million due, or 9.5 million that's due for the 3 events. None of that has been paid. What has been paid are the promotional fees for the Kingston meet alone. So there's still promotional fees due for the remainder of the events and the prize money for all events.
And for your athletes, the ones who are missing out, are they looking at this like, okay, we never had it and it would have been a great bonus? Are they feeling like it was something they were relying on to set themselves up for the rest of the season? How are they feeling about the financial loss that they're in?
Well, I actually have a broad spectrum of athletes that some of the haves and have-nots, that both participated in this. And, if you have, a Masai Russell who's an Olympic champion and who's making great money on the circuit and has a great shoe contract and other endorsement deals, this is going to affect her. Of course, she's going to be upset. She's missing out on six figures. But it's not going to affect the athletes that as much as it is some other athletes that are living paycheck to paycheck and race check to race check. That I've some athletes that this money that was due to come in from Grand Slam is 70% of their earnings for the entire year.
What happens now then, Paul?
Well, that's the big question, right? Where does this go? I understand. I even had conversations with people from Grand Slam as recent as yesterday, and they still remain very optimistic. They're still talking to investors and still trying to push this thing across the line and get debts covered and move forward. It's a big challenge. Of course, you look out there, and if I'm an investor and I'm looking at this and I see, okay, well, they set the spend level at $30 million for year one. They obviously haven't been able to come close to covering that, but are there signs? Are there signs that they could cover that in the future? And am I willing to put in enough to dig them out of the deep hole that they've dug in order to continue with this?
Adam, I've worked with Michael for a long time, for well over a decade, and know how passionate he is about athletes having proper earnings, being recognised for their brilliance and their talent, and trying, especially in the American market, trying to punch through in a crowded landscape. I think he's the only American athlete, or he was until a few years ago, who'd ever reached the top 10 of their equivalent of kind of spotty. You know what I mean? And so, it is very hard as an athlete in America to break through the kind of stranglehold of NBA and NFL and other team sports. And so his intentions were absolutely genuine, I've no doubt. What has come out from your investigation, and I'm sure a lot of people in Paul's position will kind of recognise, is that right as late as the third event, before they cancelled LA, obviously they knew they were in trouble before Philadelphia even went ahead. Yeah. And I think there's maybe a lack of kind of openness around that will have hurt people within the sport.
Yeah, I think that's true. Nobody is suggesting, Michael Johnson went into this with the intention of misleading people or deceiving people. I think what Grand Slam Track did, by saying with a 30 million financial commitment, is something that is done reasonably often in investor circles, where you kind of you make the most publicly of what you may have, rather than necessarily what you do have at your disposal. I mean, people can think whether that's right or wrong. Now, there is a school of thought that, look, he had Winners Alliance at the table. Bill Ackman is a billionaire, right? And there is this option of 19.5 million, right? In billionaire land, that's not a huge amount of money. It's very easy for us to say on a podcast that, someone else should step up. And also you've got the Todd Bowley interest that goes quite a long way as well. If it's a term sheet stage, it's not, preliminary. It's preliminary in terms of the term sheet, but it definitely was cause for optimism. So I think there is a school of thought that, Michael probably felt that these people wouldn't let him down. But there is also, I think, a naivety attached to that you do need written, binding legal assurances if you're going to contract athletes and vendors and facilities, all of which are still owed a huge amount of money. So, if you really cut it down and boil it down, by Philadelphia, for sure, he was sending people to work without knowing if he could pay them.
On the basis, obviously, that you look after these athletes, Paul, I am guessing you will have been in discussions about the whole concept of GST with Michael and the team way before it was going to launch. When you, I'm not trying to get hindsight here, but when you go back to those discussions, were you in favour of this? Did you think, crikey, this is ambitious, or what were your overall feelings on behalf of yourself and the athletes in the initial discussions?
Well, I had concerns for sure. Number one, I was concerned that the sport could sustain that amount of spend and that amount of revenue. I didn't see exactly how, I had a lot of experience running smaller level meets on the American Track League, and I knew how hard it was to get sponsorships behind that. Granted, I was starting with grassroots type budgets, not millions of dollars, so we were building from the bottom up as opposed to from the top down. But I knew how hard it was to get sponsorship there. I knew how hard it was to get exposure. And if the sport's not getting exposure, you're not going to get sponsors, right? So I was definitely concerned. The model, the 3-day model, was concerning as well, especially with most of the meets being held in the U.S. Filling stadiums in the U.S. is challenging for this sport. It's not NFL. It's not Major League Baseball. It's not NBA. It has to build to that level. So, looking back, I think that Michael went in there with a lot of gumption and determination. Was it misguided? Probably a little bit, but it was hopeful.
Adam, in terms of the future, GST is still, the message is still coming from them that they're going to get the money to pay athletes and that this is not dead in the water. They want to revive the concept. And when LA was cancelled, the messaging was that this is going to happen next year. How have you heard anything that makes you believe that that is at all possible? Is there any hope for the athletes they're going to get their money and that this GST concept continues?
They're definitely still... they're still having discussions, they say, with athletes. I think it's obviously a lot harder now because you're asking people to come in and cover debts, and you're also asking people to come in. Sadly, when people aren't paid, it means there's going to be a lot of publicity about the league. Unfortunately, I think people now increasingly know this league as the league where athletes haven't been paid more than the league that is this exciting, disruptive force. So it would need someone prepared to come in, cover the debts. If they're going to do it the same way again, in terms of the business class travel, the individual rooms, the prize money at the same level, someone's going to have to come in and lose a bit of money again. Not only cover the debts, but also lose money for a couple of years before you make money. As far as I understand it, even a lot of the broadcast deals, they weren't huge broadcast deals. It was almost, we give you a little bit, if anything, for years 1 and 2, but then by years 3, when it's proven, it will really be worth something when we go to market.
Which is not unusual at the beginning of a sporting concept, is it? To just get visibility is the most important thing, and actually to have a platform of any sort was good for it.
Of course, and I think one of the areas, the more I think about it, which was short, was if you just look at the sponsors that they had for the tournament, that looked pretty weak to me, actually. It was like they had a pet food company, a track company, but if you compare it to another disruptive league like a Sail GP, where you have kind of I think like Mubadala and PIF and Oracle and Rolex, Grand Slam track. To me, it looks like it needed. Paul again knows much more about this than me. Like one of the big shoe companies to come in. Which I used to call boot companies.
I think we were all surprised, those of us who follow the sport, that they weren't able to get a European meet off the ground. This is a huge marketplace for athletics, right? So that seemed, or that at least for me, kind of the alarm bells rang slightly on that.
And sorry, Trappers, when they first announced it, I think they said the home of it would be LA, and that there would be 1 or 2 global events out of the 4. So clearly something changed in that. There was some conversation, and I don't actually know the answer to this, early on about the possibility of London, and then there was a bit of to and fro over whether London didn't want it or they didn't want London. Jamaica, to me, it was a romantic choice, right, in terms of the decision they made. But
it's not a business choice, though, is it?
Everyone now agrees it was a really bad choice. And actually, from the people I've spoken to within track and field, that unless you're getting like the really big Jamaican athletes there, actually it tends to be like high school and college meets that do far better in Jamaica than actually professional.
If somehow, Paul, it was to come back for a second season, and I don't know, let's say the first meet is in Philadelphia, what would you say to your athletes about whether they should participate or not?
Well, the biggest determining factor on that is if they pay this past year, first of all, or come to some arrangement to pay the athletes. I feel if they come through and make good on their payments from last year, I would be wholeheartedly supporting. Short of that, the athletes are going to be very skeptical. But truly, if they do end up paying, there's no harm, no foul. We move on and we support it. I think that the athletes love the way they were treated. They like the concept. If the prize money goes down, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. The prize money was great for the athletes to strive for. But remember, they were competing twice over this 2 or 3 day period. You compete on the Diamond League, you still get solid appearance fees. Yeah. The prize money's nowhere near as high as what Grand Slam was projecting, but you only compete once generally. So it's a balancing act and a decision athletes are going to have to make.
Do you think this will end up in court? And do you think that this is, as an event, as a league, as a competition, is dead in the water?
I don't think it's dead in the water yet. I hope it doesn't end up in court, because I think if it ends up in court, nobody wins in this situation. I think you end up in court and it kills Grand Slam track. I'd rather see athletes getting behind this and supporting it, and agents getting behind this and supporting it, and seeing if it can go, because overall it could be a very positive thing for the sport. They came out of the blocks a little bit too strong but ultimately, a rising tide raises all boats, and if we can get Grand Slam track to be successful, it can help the rest of the sport.
And there has been a joint statement. We asked Grand Slam track for comment. We haven't got that, but they have, along with Winners Alliance, put out a statement to Adams, the Athletic, and that said as follows: Winners Alliance and Grand Slam track continue to work together to recapitalise the company. We remain steadfast in our commitment to bringing in new investment partners who appreciate the opportunity and promise that Grand Slam track's first season presents. And
I reached out to Michael as a friend actually the other day, because I know it will be hurting him a lot that this is the current situation with Grand Slam track. And as I said before, he's someone who is deeply passionate about his sport and the potential for athletes to actually be recognised and earn a living. So I hope for his sake and yours, Paul, and all your athletes, that something can come from this, and it'll be looked back as birthing pains in years to come.
Absolutely, let's hope.
Okay, before we go, it is the start of the WSL season this weekend. We'll look ahead next.
So the WSL starts, as it's become tradition to do so, in the first international break weekend of the Premier League. And I think we're talking about how sports evolve and how sports kind of carve their own market, in a crowded landscape. And I think that's a really clever thing the WSL have done every year, actually, is to kind of fill the vacuum, fill the noise.
And also, but fill the vacuum with some very cleverly chosen fixtures. I think we've all moved on from the days of thinking that it all just went into a computer and it was randomly spat out. But and this actually is a bit. I know our weekend show is going to look ahead to the start of the NFL season, but this is very similar to the NFL and how they really think very carefully about what their opening weekend games are going to be to get the eyeballs on. But you look at Chelsea, Manchester City, a Merseyside derby, and Arsenal against London City Lionesses. And they're also scheduled at different times as well. So Chelsea, Manchester City is Friday night. Arsenal, London City is Saturday lunchtime. The Merseyside derby is Sunday lunchtime. So there are lots of stories already that will come out of the opening weekend. It's very clever.
Yeah, and this all comes on the back of the news as well, that there has been a ruling that WSL and WSL2 are now going to have minimum salaries for this season, which is very, very positive. And the news that Nike are going to give free boots and gloves to, obviously to goalkeepers, and to players who haven't got any kind of boot or glove endorsement across the top two tiers. And apparently this is as many as 250 players in those divisions are buying their own boots. And for me, that was just a little sign again of how brands really want to be associated with WSL and with women's football generally. And I think off the back, we always know there's a bounce off the back of a major tournament, because the Lionesses have kind of been doing the marketing for the WSL, for the last few years, haven't they? With finals since 22-23. And last year there was a little dip actually in attendance, wasn't there? Because there was no major championship.
Now that needs to translate into the crowds in the WSL. I know there are some, Arsenal are the prime example, who have very, very big crowds. But we've discussed it before. We've still seen, 1,500, 2,000 sometimes at games on a Sunday evening. So it'd be interesting to see how that translates crowd-wise going into this season. The other thing that fascinates me more than anything else in the WSL season is what London City Lionesses will do and how competitive they will be, having been promoted and having, brought in an awful lot of players with a lot of WSL experience. And because they are independent and not connected to a men's team or a club that has a men's team, I just find what they do will be really interesting, and it will be thought-provoking for a lot of people within the game, I think.
Yep, you can catch up with all episodes of The Sports Agents on YouTube, Global Player, or wherever you get your podcasts. Remember to hit subscribe or follow, and please leave us a review.
Get in touch on email, thesportsagents@global.com, or on our socials, or via the form in the show notes.
We are back tomorrow with our weekend edition, which also features a special interview with the always brilliant and beautifully smelling Jason Bell. There's more of that in the podcast. Ahead of the new NFL season, it's all about the drama surrounding Micah Parsons and a transfer saga to put Isaacs to shame. Don't miss it. Thanks for listening.
The Sports Agents
with Gabby Logan and Mark Chapman.